All right, everyone, the Attorney General of New York has announced New York is going to sue that damn dirty Trump administration for its tax policies. And here's the thing. They have a problem with the tax law getting rid of some of the state deductions. See, the way it's worked, it's been decreased now. The way it has traditionally worked is you get a bit of a break on your federal taxes if you live in a state where the state tax rate is burdensome. Certainly that's the case for Vermont. New York, definitely very much the case as well. California, they tend to be, basically, it's a laundry list of blue states. The state tax rate is very high. In order to equalize things, the federal government gives you a little bit of a break. They've decided to do away with parts of that. I believe in part it's been reduced. The New York Attorney General comes out, and this was surreal, says, New Yorkers are going to have to pay too much, and the state alone has the right to profit off of this. And so we're suing because the idea is that the state will be making less money. And it's totally ridiculous. It's like basically the New York Attorney General is saying, we have the right to tax our population to death, but Uncle Sam doesn't have a right to reduce that deduction and get more money out of them too. That would be horrible. So it's okay if you're paying a burdensome degree of taxes to your state because, we here in New York know how to use it. Mainly for Albany and New York City, like if you're in upstate New York, basically, fuck you. It's like in Vermont. If you're in Burlington or Montpelier, it's great. Anywhere else, you're basically being leeched by the state government. The problem being, of course, the Burlington area has such a disproportionately large population, they control the entire state. That's why it's a hippie state. But the federal government doesn't have the right to mildly increase taxes. Now, overall, Trump has massively reduced taxes on Americans. It doesn't matter who you are. The mandate's gone. So, if you're so poor you can't afford health insurance because the health insurance system sucks, well, then you don't have to pay that 2.5% income penalty. For someone, by the way, who is, in the working class, like lower middle class or something, they end up paying a bunch of money because they can't pay a bunch of money. It's the most ridiculous notion that was ever signed into law. By the way, it's the reason Obamacare continued to exist and be constitutional is because John Roberts got the bright idea that the ACA fundamentally was a tax. Oh yeah, the government can levy taxes. It's an uneven tax. It's basically a penalty on the poor, but fuck them. Leave it to John Roberts, the neocon, to make such a stupid decision, by the way. Hopefully we never see any more neocons appointed to the court. Unfortunately, we probably will in the future. We'll probably get another Bush at some point, and they'll ruin the economy again, start several more fucking wars. But it's funny. It's funny to see New York State essentially say, hey, Uncle Sam, hands off what is essentially our money. We're going to have to drop the tax rate. New Yorkers will pay too much. What fundamentally gives you any right to have any federal relief simply because New York decides to tax its residents to death? It doesn't make any sense. The 45% of the population that doesn't live in New York City or Albany basically is screwed. The rest of New York City, it's a big tourist draw and it brings in a lot of income. Yeah, you pump a shit ton of money into it from the rest of New York. No wonder. Again, it's like some of these infrastructure projects that happen in Montpelier or in Burlington here. Yeah, like that Amtrak connection they're never going to actually build. They've talked about it for 20 friggin' years, maybe 25? Since I was a little kid, I can remember reading about it when people still read newspapers. So it's never going to happen. It's like, I think it's right along a Superfund site in part 2. Could be a little bit of a problem. That took them years to clean up. It was basically just this one little field that had some coal tailings or some crazy shit in it. And it took them years and years to clean it up. And that was the federal government being stupid. Now here's what I would say. Why doesn't New York drop the tax rate and the federal government continues to drop the tax rate? All you got to do is get rid of a bunch of bad government and you can drop it as much as you want. Cut some bureaus. Again, there are 3 things you can do. Combine bureaus to raise efficiency because they often overlap. It's like the FBI and the NSA. So many of their functions overlap. Just combine them together, into one bureau, or get rid of one of one, or decrease them, reduce their scope, fire some of the employees, let them make do with less, cut their salaries a bit, maybe get rid of pensions. If we just got rid of government pensions, it'd be a good thing. The American taxpayers should not have to pay perpetually somebody who is no longer doing actual work on their behalf. No, that should be something that private industries engage in, because the goal should be this. People should prefer the most skilled. You want them in private industry. Fuck the government. The government's going to have the proper skills. It's going to be massive anyway, but you can reduce its size considerably. I've said I would reduce it by about 50%. That means 50% of all spending would go out the window, and the tax rate would be dropped accordingly to such a degree that it would be a surplus economy. That's what you ultimately want. That means you can make much more than the amount of debt payments you need to make to keep the interest down. You pay down the debt. Government is shrunk, and then it's frozen in place, too. You reduce the size and then freeze it. If I was the president of the United States and I had the supermajority in the House and Senate and the SCOTUS didn't stand in my way, no obstruction, that's what I would do. 50% of government would be gone. A lot of bureaus wouldn't exist. If their functions are important, the states can handle it. Essentially, the federal government doesn't even have a constitutional mandate to do some of the things that it does, so who cares? It's funny to see, though, a high-tax state worrying about the fact that the federal government will take a few more pennies from people. No, New York's tax rate is burdensome. That's why the program existed in the first place, to give extra relief to slightly drop the federal tax rate. The rest of the taxpayers in the United States shouldn't have to subsidize the fact that you're a high-tax hellhole. Nobody else's responsibility. The state of New York's government represents the people of New York. You're not representing them properly with the tax rates the way that they are, and the cost of living in many parts of New York. Have you seen the cost of living there? It's like back in the old days. Thinking of Vermont as a high-tax, sort of a touristy state. Its cost of living's fairly high. Then I started looking at some of these other states, and I'm like, my goodness, like San Francisco or something like that. It's like, hey, it's only $10,000 a month to rent this pup tent. It's basically the way things work. That's kind of the way it is in parts of like New York City or Albany or something. I've been to Albany before. I mean, being there a little bit more than when I was in New York City. I just sort of went through on a bus. But actually in Albany for a short period, it's an okay place. You know, as far as cities go, Albany's not bad. It's pretty clean and safe, generally speaking. But seriously, a lot of that infrastructure, it is paid for by people who don't live in Albany. It's public works, it's government stuff, you know, state buildings, state infrastructure, parks. And it's just generally a shit show. It's a freak show if you go to New York. New York is an extremely high-tax location. Okay, it's not California, but it's pretty close. Yeah, that's your problem. It's not our problem. Why should, like, a taxpayer from Vermont has to contribute a few dollars because a few less can be contributed by a New Yorker? It doesn't make any sense. By the way, what about the cost of living locally adjusted? Like, it's different. Some backwoodsy area in northern New York is going to be different as far as how much a person has to make in order to live a dignified lifestyle than if they're living in a penthouse in Albany. There's a big difference between those. So we shouldn't even really look at states as single entities for tax purposes like that. It should be a local level, like at the county level, honestly. Because there can be a huge difference. There's a big difference. There's a huge difference between Rutland and Burlington. Rutland, cost of living is considerably lower. The average income is considerably lower. It's different. It's not the same. There are different jobs. The wages are different. Everything is different. By the way, I much prefer Rutland over Burlington generally. Burlington's a little bit big for me, actually. A little bit too noisy. Very scenic, very nice on the UVM campus or something, and you get into the downtown, it's a little bit too many cars for me. Especially on the east side there, which is called South Burlington, which is slightly a misnomer. It's really East Burlington when you it's southeast by East Burlington. Quite noisy along the main road and even the side roads, especially with those new fucking jets they've got at the airport. My goodness, they shake your windows. That's about all. Peace out.